There is a truth about closing cycles that no one wants to hear. You cannot move forward carrying everything you once were. Something must die. And I am not talking about poetic metaphors. I am talking about real psychological death, the annihilation of parts of your identity that you swore to protect, but that now keep you trapped. Carl Jung devoted decades to studying the most painful process of the human psyche, transformation. And he discovered something disturbing. Every time you evolve, every time you close one cycle and enter another, you do not simply improve, you die. A version of you ceases to exist. And if you do not allow this voluntary death, you will remain eternally trapped between who you were and who you could become. Jung was not interested in superficial self-help. He was obsessed with the deep architecture of the human soul. And what he discovered by analyzing patients, myths, religions, and his own descent into the unconscious was this: humanity is terrified of what he called initiatory death, the process by which the ego must fragment so that the self can emerge. Why do people remain stuck in relationships that ended years ago? Why do men in their 40s still live as if they were 20? Why do you still carry traumas from decades ago as if they were an essential part of who you are? Because you are afraid to kill the version of yourself that is attached to these things. Because closing cycles is not about gently letting go. It is about executing parts of you that should already be dead. Throughout this video, we will decode the dark mechanism Jung mapped. We will understand why closure requires death, why renewal requires psychological bloodshed, and why the strongest men in history were masters at killing their own obsolete identities. Do not expect comfort. Expect raw truth about the only real path forward, through the cemetery of your dead versions. Law 1. The ego is a walking corpse. The identity you defend so fiercely is already dead. You just did not have the courage to bury it. The first brutal truth about closing cycles is this: what you call me is a temporary construction. Jung called this the ego, the conscious mask you use to navigate the world. But here is the problem. The ego is attached to continuity. It needs to believe that you are the same person you were 10 years ago. Because if you are not, then who the hell are you? Jung understood that the ego is like a corrupt politician. It will lie, distort, and sabotage anything to maintain its power. Why? Because the ego is afraid of the self. That deeper center of the psyche that does not care about your neuroses, your traumas, your excuses. When you say, "I can't close this cycle," what you are really saying is, "My ego does not want to admit that the version of me who lived this cycle is dead, and if I accept that, I will have to face the void of not knowing who I am now." Heraclitus said 2,500 years ago, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." Why? Because neither the river nor you are the same. But you keep trying to step into the same river, hoping nothing has changed. Between 1913 and 1917, Jung went through what he called a confrontation with the unconscious, a devastating psychological collapse. He saw visions, heard voices, felt as if he were going insane. Do you know what was happening? His ego was dying. The identity he had built as Freud's disciple, as a respected psychiatrist, as a rational man, all of it was disintegrating, and he had to let it die. If he had tried to cling to that old version of himself, he would have truly gone mad. Instead, he voluntarily descended into the hell of his unconscious. He recorded his visions in a book we now know as the Red Book. And when he emerged, he was no longer the same man. He had killed Jung the Freudian, and Jung the explorer of the self was born.
You know that guy who still wears his high school team jacket at 35? Who still tells stories of the golden days as if they were yesterday? Who cannot accept that his ex has moved on? He is attached to a corpse. The young man he was 15 years ago, but because he did not allow the symbolic death, he became a ghost, stuck between two worlds, belonging to neither. The Arsenal. Practical application. Exercise 1. The Death Inventory. Take pen and paper. Write who I was 5 years ago that is already dead. List everything: beliefs, relationships, goals, fears, habits. Then ask, how many of these dead things am I still carrying as if they were alive? Exercise 2. The Symbolic Funeral. Choose one obsolete identity. It can be me, ex's boyfriend; me, the guy who was going to be a rock star; me, the victim of that trauma. Write a short funeral speech for this identity. Read it out loud and bury it. Rituals are powerful because the unconscious responds to symbols, not logic.
Law 2. The shadow wants you stuck. Part of you needs the drama, the pain, the open cycle, because without it, you don't know who you are. Jung discovered something disturbing. There is a part of the psyche that actively resists closure. He called it the shadow, all the aspects of you that were repressed, denied, rejected. And the shadow has its own agenda. The shadow is not evil in a moral sense, it is simply unconscious. And the unconscious operates through repetitive patterns. If you spent 20 years being the guy who was betrayed, your shadow built an entire identity structure around that. Now imagine that you finally process the betrayal, forgive, close the cycle. Do you know what happens? Your shadow panics, because if you are no longer the betrayed one, then who are you? The shadow will sabotage the closure. It will make you remember the pain. It will whisper, you will never be able to trust again. It will pull you back. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." The shadow is the abyss, and it wants you to keep looking. The myth of Oedipus is not about inevitable fate. It is about unconscious self-sabotage. Oedipus receives a prophecy: you will kill your father and marry your mother. So what does he do? He runs. But where does he run? Straight into the place where the prophecy is fulfilled. Jung would say, Oedipus's shadow wanted the prophecy to come true because he was obsessed with it. And what you resist persists. What you try to flee, you meet. How many times have you sworn, I will never do this again, and done exactly that again? It is not weakness, it is the shadow operating. You say you want to close the cycle with your ex, but every Friday night you check their Instagram. You say you want to overcome that childhood trauma, but in every conversation with friends, there you are telling the story again. Why? Because part of you is addicted to the role of victim, of the wounded one, of someone who went through so much. Without that role, you would have to build a new identity, and that takes work, and it is scary. The Arsenal. Practical application. Technique 1. Dialogue with the shadow. Jung used active imagination, conversing with unconscious parts of the psyche. Sit in silence. Ask out loud, which part of me does not want to close this cycle? Wait. Listen to what arises. It may be a thought, an image, a sensation. Do not judge, just observe. The shadow loses power when exposed to the light of consciousness. Technique 2. The brutal honesty test. Complete this sentence, I don't close this cycle because if I do, I will have to admit that. Be brutally honest. The answer will shock you,
But that answer is where the key to your prison lives.
Law 3. Closure is not forgetting, it is transmutation. You don't erase the past, you alchemize it. Many people confuse closure with amnesia. They think closing a cycle means forgetting, erasing, pretending it never happened. Jung completely disagreed. For him, closure was integration, taking that experience and transforming it from poison into medicine. Jung studied alchemy for years, not because he believed you could literally turn lead into gold, but because he understood that alchemists were doing psychological work. The transmutation of metals was a metaphor for the transmutation of the soul. Lead is heavy, dark, toxic. Gold is precious, luminous, eternal. But you don't forget the lead, you transform it. Likewise, you don't forget trauma, betrayal, loss. You transmute it into wisdom, strength, compassion. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of Auschwitz, exemplified this. He did not forget the concentration camp. He transformed that hell into Man's Search for Meaning, one of the most important books of the 20th century. He transmuted lead into gold. The myth of the phoenix is not about a bird that dies and resurrects intact. It is about a creature that burns itself voluntarily. It does not wait to die of old age. It builds its own funeral pyre, throws itself into the fire, and from the ashes emerges renewed. Jung saw the phoenix as the perfect symbol of the individuation process. You do not close cycles by waiting for time to heal everything. You close cycles by voluntarily burning the version of you that belongs to that cycle. Have you noticed how the strongest people have the most brutal stories? Not because suffering automatically strengthens you, but because they chose to transmute that suffering. A man who was betrayed can become a bitter cynic who never trusts again. Or he can become someone who deeply understands human complexity, who has compassion for imperfection, who knows how to recognize real loyalty when he finds it. Same experience, opposite transmutations. The arsenal, practical application. Practice 1, the alchemical letter. Write a letter to the experience you are trying to close, but not a victim's letter, an alchemist's letter. Write, "Thank you for teaching me X. Without you, I would not have developed Y. Now I transmute you into Z." Real example? "Thank you, betrayal, for teaching me to value loyalty. Without you, I would have remained naive. Now I transmute you into discernment and conscious partner choice." Practice 2, the fire ritual. Take something symbolic of the cycle, a letter, a photo, an object. Burn it, literally. While it burns, visualize the transmutation happening. You are not destroying the memory, you are releasing the energy trapped in it. Law 4. The self demands sacrifice. What you call me must die so that your true self can be born. Yui made a crucial distinction, ego versus self. The ego is who you think you are, your memories, your narratives, your self-image. The self is who you really are, the archetypal center of the psyche, connected to the collective unconscious, to the totality of your being. The problem is that the ego is mortally afraid of the self. Why? Because the self is bigger than the ego. The self does not care about your excuses, your fears, your justifications. The self wants individuation, the process of becoming whole, complete, integrated. And individuation requires sacrifice. You must sacrifice the ego on the altar of the self. You must kill the small, fearful, controlling version of yourself so that the true, powerful, authentic version can emerge. All great religions understood this. Christ dies on the cross to be resurrected. Buddha abandons his life as a prince. Odin sacrifices his eye to gain wisdom. These are not literal stories, they are maps of the psychological individuation process. The story of Abraham being ordered to sacrifice his son Isaac is disturbing if read literally, but Jung interpreted it symbolically. Isaac represents the future, hope, attachment. God does not want Isaac's blood. He wants Abraham to let go of the attachment. At the last moment, God stops Abraham. Why? Because Abraham had already made the psychological sacrifice. He was willing to let go, and that willingness is what closes the cycle. How many cycles do you not close because you are not willing to sacrifice what must be sacrificed? Comfort, self-image, the illusion of control? You want to close the cycle of a toxic relationship, but you don't want to sacrifice the fantasy that one day she will change. You want to close the cycle of a suffocating job, but you don't want to sacrifice financial security. You want to close the cycle of a trauma, but you don't want to sacrifice the identity of survivor. The self is calling you forward, but the ego is holding on with claws and teeth. The arsenal. Practical application. Practice 1. Conscious sacrifice. Identify what you must sacrifice to close the cycle. Do not pretend you don't know. You know. Write, to close this cycle, I must sacrifice. Be specific. Then declare out loud, I choose to sacrifice this, consciously, not as a victim, but as an alchemist. Practice 2. The psychological fast. Choose 1 week. During that week, you will fast from everything that feeds the open cycle. If it is an ex, a total fast from digital stalking. If it is a trauma, a fast from retelling the story. If it is a job, a fast from complaining about it. See what happens when you stop feeding what should be dead. If you made it this far, something in you has already changed. You started this video expecting a magical formula to let go without pain, but now you understand there is no closure without death. There is no renewal without psychological bloodshed. So far, we have dismantled illusions. Now we build the arsenal. Because understanding that you must kill parts of yourself is one thing, knowing how to do it without self-destruction is another. The next laws are more technical, more practical, more dangerous. They are the tools Jung used on himself and his patients to execute initiatory death and emerge transformed. Are you ready for the real work? Law 5. Grief is work, not a feeling. You don't get over anything. You process it. And processing requires action. Jung discovered something that contradicts all modern self-help. Emotions do not heal with time. They heal with active work. He called this grief work, a conscious, intentional process of processing loss. Modern culture treats grief as a disease. You suffer from depression. You have anxiety, as if they were viruses that appear out of nowhere. Jung disagreed. For him, unprocessed grief is trapped psychic energy. It is a cycle that does not close because you did not do the necessary work. Freud wrote Mourning and Melancholia, distinguishing the two. Mourning is a healthy process. You acknowledge the loss, feel the pain, integrate the experience, move on. Melancholia is pathological mourning. You get stuck, ruminating, identifying with the loss. Jung went further. Grief is not only about literal death. It is about any loss, end of a relationship, end of a career, end of an identity, end of hope, and each requires specific work. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross mapped 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But here is the mistake people make. They think these stages are automatic, that you just wait and go through them. Lie. You can stay stuck in denial for decades. Jung saw patients stuck in anger their entire lives. Why? Because they did not work the stages. They merely felt them passively. You ended the relationship 2 years ago, but you never truly sat alone and processed it, never wrote everything you needed to say, never cried until there were no tears left, never performed a farewell ritual.
Instead, you moved on superficially, started another relationship, distracted yourself with work, and then 2 years later, you collapse out of nowhere. Why? Because unprocessed grief is alive in your unconscious, waiting. The arsenal, practical application. Technique 1, the grief week. Set aside 1 week or a weekend to consciously do grief work. First stage, denial. Write everything you are still denying about the cycle. Second, anger. Write a total rage letter, unfiltered. Do not send it, just write. Third, bargaining. List all the what-ifs you still carry. Fourth, depression. Allow yourself to fully feel the loss. Cry, feel. Fifth, acceptance. Write, I accept that this cycle is over and that I cannot change it. Technique 2, the farewell ritual. Create a ritual. It can be writing a letter and burning it, going to the place where it began and saying goodbye, creating a playlist and listening while meditating on the end. Rituals are the language of the unconscious. They seal closure in ways words alone cannot.
Law 6. You do not close cycles alone. Isolation is the enemy of closure. Witnesses are necessary. Here, Jung surprises. He discovered that certain psychological processes cannot happen in total isolation. You need witnesses. You need reflection. You need another human being to witness your transformation. Jung worked with interpersonal analysis, therapist and patient. But this was not just clinical technique, it was archetypal necessity. Why? Because the unconscious speaks through projection. You project unconscious contents onto other people, and it is through these projections that you become aware of what is hidden. Alone, you can rationalize, justify, deceive yourself indefinitely. But in the presence of another, especially someone trained to see through masks, you cannot escape yourself. Monastic communities understood this. You do not reach enlightenment alone in a cave. You need the Sangha, the community, because transformation must be witnessed to become real. Jung had patients who spent years in analysis. Why? Because it was not just about discovering the problem. It was about dying and being reborn in the presence of a qualified witness. One of his most famous patients was Wolfgang Pauli, a brilliant quantum physicist undergoing a nervous breakdown. Jung did not heal Pauli with advice. He witnessed Pauli's descent into the unconscious, interpreted his dreams, and guided his rebirth. Pauli closed the cycle of his crisis because someone was there to witness the transformation. Why do AA groups work? It is not just about stopping drinking. It is about telling your story in front of people who understand. It is about being seen in your worst version and still accepted. It is about witnessing others closing cycles and realizing you can too. You try to close cycles alone, in the dark, in silence, and you wonder why it does not work. Because humans are social creatures. Your transformation needs to be reflected back to you through the eyes of another. The arsenal, practical application. Practice 1, the confessor. Choose one person you fully trust. It does not have to be a therapist, but it can be. It must be someone who can listen without judgment, without trying to fix. Schedule a meeting. Say, I need to tell a story from beginning to end. You only need to listen and tell it. The entire story of the cycle you are closing, from beginning to end, without interruption. The simple act of verbalizing in the presence of a witness closes something in the unconscious. Practice 2, the men's circle. If you are a man, find a group of men, 3 to 4 is enough, willing to do deep work. Once a month, sit in a circle. Each person has 20 minutes to speak about the cycle they are closing. The others only witness. No advice, no judgment, just presence. This is ancestral medicine, and it works. Law 7. The final death is the death of meaning. The last attachment you must kill is the meaning you gave to the cycle. This is the most subtle and most powerful law. Jung discovered that people can process emotions, perform rituals, work with witnesses, and still remain stuck. Why? Because they did not kill the meaning. Humans are narrative creatures. We do not just live experiences, we turn them into stories with meaning. I was betrayed because I'm not good enough. I lost my job because the universe is against me. I was abused because I deserved it. These narratives are poison. And the worst part is that you cling to them because they provide coherence. They explain the unexplainable. They give you an identity, even if it is the identity of a victim. Viktor Frankl said, "Man cannot avoid suffering, but he can choose how to cope with it, find meaning in it, and move forward with renewed purpose." But Jung went further. Sometimes you must kill the meaning you gave to the suffering. The book of Job is about a man who loses everything: family, wealth, health. His friends say, "You must have sinned. God is punishing you." They are trying to give meaning to suffering. But in the end, God appears and essentially says, "You have no right to meaning. The universe is larger than your narratives." Job accepts the absurd, and only then is he restored. Jung saw this as symbolic. True closure comes when you accept that there may be no deep meaning. Maybe bad things happen for no reason. Maybe betrayal says nothing about your worth. Maybe trauma has no hidden lesson. You tell the story of your divorce with the same script for 5 years. Every detail, every villain, every lesson. The story is polished, rehearsed, and you think this is processing. But ask yourself, what if the story you tell is keeping you stuck? What if you need to kill that narrative? What if real closure comes when you say, "It happened, I don't know why," and that's okay? The Arsenal. Practical application. Technique 1. The absurd rewrite. Take the story of your cycle. Write 3 completely different versions of it. First, you are the villain. Second, it was all random coincidence with no meaning. Third, it was a blessing in disguise from the beginning. Now, notice, all are fictions, including the original version you carry. When you kill attachment to the true meaning, you are freed. Technique 2. The absurd mantra. When you catch yourself ruminating about the cycle, repeat, "It happened, I don't know why," and that's okay. It sounds too simple. It is, and it is the hardest thing, because the ego hates not knowing. It prefers a bad narrative to no narrative at all.
So, that's it. You have reached the end of this journey, and now you know the truth Jung took decades to decode. Closing cycles is not about peace. It is not about gently letting go. It is not about time healing all wounds. It is about voluntary death. It is about executing the versions of you that should already be dead. It is about alchemical transmutation. It is about sacrificing the ego on the altar of the self. The question now is not if you will close cycles. The question is, do you have the courage to kill what must die? Because every great man in history was a killer, not of others, of himself. He killed the coward he was, killed the boy who was afraid, killed the victim who carried traumas like trophies. And from the ashes of this cemetery of dead identities, he emerged renewed. The phoenix does not resurrect, it burns voluntarily. And you? Are you ready to light the fire? The cycles are waiting. The dead versions of you are asking for burial. And on the other side of this psychological death, there is a man you do not yet know. Stronger, more whole, more true. But to meet him, you must kill who you are now. The fire is ready. The funeral can begin. The choice, as always, is yours.